Ryan Zimmerman left his hometown of Corbin, Kentucky in the summer of 2015 with hopeful eyes and a heart open to possibility. At 21 years old, he was on a journey, not just across state lines to Columbus, Ohio, but into the deeper folds of his identity. Ryan wanted to discover who he was and who he could become. But that search for self, filled with promise and vulnerability, ended in betrayal, violence, and death. He had connected online with someone using the name Laurel Emerson. Their conversations had turned intimate, and eventually, the virtual relationship pulled him to Columbus. What Ryan didn't know then was that Laurel Emerson was actually Corey Buzzard, a married man presenting under an alias. When Ryan arrived, he moved into an apartment with Corey's wife, Sarah Buzzard, and their friend, Naira Whitaker, a transgender woman. The living arrangement was unusual. Corey was romantically involved with Ryan, while Sarah was in a relationship with Naira. For a short while, the household existed in a fragile, complicated balance. But as summer faded into fall, the environment grew tense. Sarah resented Ryan's presence and the bond he had with her spouse. Naira viewed Ryan as an intruder. By late September, Corey told Ryan he needed to leave. Then, over the weekend of the 25th of September, 2015, Corey went out of town to meet someone in Athens. Ryan, desperate not to be kicked out, pleaded with Sarah to let him stay. He was last heard from that weekend. 2 days later, his car was impounded. And on the 17th of November 2015, after failed attempts to contact him, Ryan's father reported him missing. His disappearance didn't raise immediate red flags. Ryan was a young adult, far from home, exploring his identity, including the possibility of transitioning, voice training, hormone therapy, and shopping for women's clothing. He had even posted to Craigslist about wanting to be the submissive partner in a relationship. His family hadn't known this side of him, which only deepened the distance and confusion. For months, nothing happened. Then, on the 5th of January, 2016, a person walking their dog along the west side of Grand Lake St. Mary's State Park in Mercer County, Ohio, made a chilling discovery. They called 911 with a shaky uncertainty, saying, "I may be totally off my rocker, but I was just out walking my dog and I came across some bones that looked to me to be human." Authorities confirmed the bones were indeed human. What they found was only a partial body, most of the torso, but missing parts from the elbows and knees down, and notably, the skull. The remains bore saw marks, indicating the person had been dismembered. The discovery turned a missing persons case into a suspected homicide. A forensic anthropologist concluded the victim was a male, estimated between 20 and 35 years old. The bones were sent to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation for DNA extraction, but no match came up. Without identification, the case stalled. For 4 long years, Ryan Zimmerman was a John Doe. And for his family, there were no answers, just silence. That silence finally broke in June 2020. Criminal intelligence analyst Jennifer Lester was reviewing Columbus missing person cases when she noticed something strange. Ryan Zimmerman's DNA had never been submitted, despite being missing since 2015. Investigators quickly obtained samples from his parents in Corbin, Kentucky. The results were conclusive. The partial remains found in the park in 2016 belonged to Ryan Zimmerman. But knowing who he was still left the larger question unanswered. Who killed him? Lester and the team dug into Ryan's digital footprint, Google searches, texts, social media messages. They unearthed his relationship with Corey Buzzard, the apartment arrangement, and the rising tensions before he vanished. They learned about Sarah, the jealous wife, and Naira, the possessive partner. In July 2021, detectives searched the Columbus apartment where Ryan had lived. Traces of human blood were found. They also tracked down the Toyota Corolla believed to have been used to transport Ryan's remains. Though it had been traded in years earlier, it was recovered and tested positive for human DNA. The walls were closing in. On the 25th of August, 2021, authorities arrested Sarah Buzzard in Marion, Indiana, on multiple charges: aggravated murder, abuse of a corpse, grand theft auto, tampering with evidence, and more. Later that same day, police arrived to arrest Naira Whitaker at the home she shared with Sarah. But before they could take her into custody, Naira shot herself in the head. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Sarah confessed everything. She told investigators she'd grown to hate Ryan, blaming him for ruining her marriage. She claimed that he was only there for Corey, not for her, and that the constant tension had pushed her to the edge. Sarah admitted that she and Naira had discussed what to do about Ryan, and that it was Naira who first suggested they kill him. On the weekend Corey was away, Sarah waited for Ryan to exit the bathroom. She attacked, wrapping her arms around his neck in a chokehold. She held on even after he lost consciousness. Then, she and Naira dismembered his body in the bathtub, cleaned up the scene, and drove to various locations to dispose of his remains, including dumpsters at gas stations and the wooded area where part of his body was eventually discovered. Investigators later confirmed that Corey Buzzard was not involved in the killing and was not considered a suspect. In September 2021, a grand jury indicted Sarah Buzzard on multiple charges, including 2 counts of aggravated murder, 3 counts of kidnapping, abduction, assault, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. She eventually struck a plea deal. In January 2022, Sarah pleaded guilty to 1 count of aggravated murder in Mercer County Common Pleas Court. The remaining charges were dropped. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. During sentencing, Sarah read a statement aloud. "Not a day goes by that I do not wish for a chance to take it all back. I accept responsibility in the role I played in Ryan's demise, and I will live every day for the rest of my life, attempting to redeem myself through positive actions and deeds." For Ryan Zimmerman, the road to self-discovery was meant to be a journey toward freedom and authenticity. He was exploring gender identity, relationships, and acceptance. But he walked into a trap. In that apartment in Columbus, trust was weaponized. Love turned lethal. The case, once cold and faceless, eventually bore a name. It was the name of a young man who wanted to live as his truest self, but instead paid for that courage with his life. For over 6 decades, Wilford Eugene Morton was a ghost in the memory of a family that never stopped wondering what happened to him. To his daughters, he was the father who waved goodbye one February morning in 1954 and never returned. To his wife, Opal, he was the man she waited for with quiet endurance, hoping each day would bring news. For a long time, that hope aged into silence, until the digital age and the resolve of a great-granddaughter pulled his story back into the light. Wilford was 27 years old when he vanished from Indore, a small town tucked into the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. He had left the coal mines years earlier, trading in the danger of underground work for the long, steady routes of truck driving. His job took him from South Bend, Indiana, where he loaded up a truck with stewed bacons, potatoes, and drove them to dealerships scattered across the Carolinas. The entire journey usually took 2 weeks, and it became his livelihood. That's what he was doing the day he disappeared, or so it seemed. On the surface, it was another routine trip. He said goodbye to his wife and children, climbed into the truck, and hit the road. But that was the last time anyone in his family ever saw him. Anna, the oldest of his 4 daughters, was only 7 years old when she watched her father leave. The image of him driving away, she would later recall, never left her. He simply never came back. His absence was not sudden like a death, but slow and agonizing, a question with no answer. Opal did everything she could to find him. She reached out to his employer in Indiana, hoping for some reassurance, some record of his whereabouts. But the reply was both shocking and devastating. Wilford had not worked there in 4 years. The timeline didn't make sense. How could the man who claimed to be on a trucking job have no recent record with the company he said employed him? She sent letters, made phone calls, even reached out to contacts in South Bend, Indiana, where he was believed to be working. But South Bend had no answers, no paper trail, no sign that Wilford had ever arrived, let alone worked there. In 1957, with nothing left to try, Opal contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Still, no one could find a trace of him. It was as though he had simply evaporated. Time passed, but the pain did not. Wilford missed everything: birthdays, holidays, the graduations of his children, the death of loved ones. Opal never remarried. She raised her daughters alone, shouldering the quiet burden of his absence. Every now and then, the family would begin searching again, driven by the hope that he might still be alive somewhere. But when no new clues surfaced, they would pull back, telling themselves maybe it was time to let go. Still, Wilford's name lingered in the family like an unfinished sentence. Decades later, a new generation picked up the trail. Anna's granddaughter, Kay Bruce, grew up hearing the stories and watching the ache linger in her grandmother's eyes. By 2021, Kay was a junior studying criminal justice at the University of Toledo in Ohio. The mystery wasn't just family history, it was a personal mission. She made a promise to find answers for her grandmother before it was too late. "I just questioned everything about it," Kay said. "With me being a criminal justice major, unsolved mysteries like that just eat at me. I mean, how can someone just disappear and fall off the face of the earth like that?" It was more than academic curiosity. It was something she carried with her, a responsibility she had accepted almost instinctively. Her determination led her to Sean McCracken, creator of the YouTube channel Mysterious WV, a series dedicated to unsolved cases and Appalachian stories long buried by time. On the 21st of August, 2021, Wilford's story aired on the channel. The response was swift and life-changing. The very night the episode went live, a viewer named Edward reached out to Sean. He had information that would end the decades-long mystery. Edward had come across a man named Wilford Morton who died in a car crash in 1956, just 2 years after the disappearance, on Route 56 in Norfolk, New York. Sean relayed the tip to Kay, who followed the lead with precision. They unearthed a local newspaper article from Norfolk that detailed the accident. The man had been a passenger in a car that struck a culvert. He died instantly. When they pulled his death certificate and compared the information, including Social Security records, it was an exact match. Wilford Eugene Morton had not changed his name. He hadn't gone underground or vanished into anonymity. He had simply left, moved north, and started a new life. Most startling of all, he had remarried, without ever divorcing Opal. It was legal bigamy, but more than that, it was a betrayal of silence. He had never mentioned his first family to anyone he met in New York. He was buried at Pine Grove Cemetery in the town of Norfolk, resting beneath a headstone with his real name, as though nothing had ever been out of place. The revelation stirred complex emotions in the Morton family. For some, it was relief. For others, heartbreak. Anna Mae Nichols, one of Wilford's daughters, said, "There was a part of me that always thought he would be 95 today, that if we found out at this point, he probably would have not been alive anymore. But to find out that he passed away so young was very difficult." Anna, now in her 70s, expressed a sorrow sharpened by truth. "I always knew, even if he was living today, he would know where we were and did not reach out to us. So, when we had come to that realization, we would not look anymore and then drop it for a long time, but then we would start looking again." The finality of his death brought an answer, but not necessarily peace. Kay, reflecting on the moment she told her family, said they were in tears. Sean McCracken recalled, "The great-granddaughter told me Saturday night they were already in tears, and I was quite frankly on cloud 9. What solved the case wasn't a police report or DNA test, but a YouTube video, a comment from a stranger, and the persistence of a young woman unwilling to let a mystery go cold. It was an astonishing testament to the strange power of the internet to reach across time and space to deliver long-awaited answers. For the Mortons, Wilford's grave now offers something they never had before. A place to grieve, to speak, to forgive. Some family members visit. They leave flowers. They run their fingers over the stone that bears his name. After 67 years, they know where he is. The closure wasn't in finding him alive. It was in knowing the truth, even when that truth hurt. Wilford Morton lived and died not far from the world he had known, but far enough to never return. The mystery is solved. But the story, like grief, lingers in the silence he left behind. In the stillness of a Florida September, when the days were long and humid and the nights swelled with the sound of insects and far-off traffic, a quiet horror unfolded inside a modest home on East River Drive in Fort Myers. What happened behind its doors on the night of the 14th of September, 2011 would haunt two families for over a decade. Lisa Collins, just 21 years old, and Stephen Rios, 35, had their lives brutally stolen in a cold, calculated act of violence that defied explanation and left their loved ones reeling. The killers didn't just take lives, they left a silence so heavy it echoed through the years. For 2 full days, that house held its breath, undisturbed, untouched, until the 16th of September, when the absence of contact from Lisa and Stephen raised alarm bells. Family members, growing uneasy, decided to check on them. What they found inside the home was the kind of scene no one prepares for, something only seen in nightmares and crime shows. Stephen had been shot 3 times. Lisa, just a girl, barely out of adolescence, had been shot 8 times. The violence was staggering, the intent undeniable. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a spontaneous argument. It was an execution. Their loved ones, stunned and shattered, immediately called law enforcement. Officers arrived quickly, securing the home and beginning what would become a long, winding investigation, one that would stretch across years, span prison walls, and require a determined push from cold case detectives unwilling to let the case fade into obscurity. In the early days, investigators pored over the scene. They combed through the victims' pasts, searching for enemies, clues, anything that might explain who could have done this and why. But despite their efforts, the trail turned cold. Witnesses were tight-lipped. No one came forward. Time, the great eraser, began to sweep over the details, and eventually, the headlines disappeared. For over a decade, the case sat dormant, but not in the hearts of those left behind. Lisa's mother never stopped hoping. The pain never dulled. Every holiday, every birthday, every missed call was a wound reopened. Stephen's family clung to the belief that the truth would surface, that even if justice had gone quiet, it hadn't disappeared. In 2021, the silence finally cracked. Thanks to a renewed partnership between the Fort Myers Police Department Cold Case Unit and the 20th Judicial Circuit State Attorney's Office, the case was reopened. Together, these investigators began revisiting the evidence, rereading statements, retesting physical traces, and reevaluating details that had once seemed insignificant. And that's when a name began to resurface: Amy Carol Parks. A closer look at the events of the 14th of September, 2011 revealed that Amy had purchased a 9mm handgun, a weapon that ballistics would later confirm matched the one used to kill Lisa and Stephen. That detail, buried for years, became the domino that would bring the others down. On the 17th of August, 2021, Amy Parks was arrested. Her freedom, enjoyed for over a decade, came to an end. Charged in connection with the double homicide, she eventually entered a plea, guilty to burglary of a dwelling and accessory after the fact. Though she was not charged with pulling the trigger, her admission acknowledged her role in the events that led to the murders. Investigators believe she helped her husband, Michael Parks, gain access to the victim's home. In exchange for her cooperation and guilty plea, Amy received a 5-year prison sentence. But her conviction was just the beginning. As detectives pushed further, Michael Parks's name emerged again, and this time it stuck. Amy's testimony, along with newly corroborated evidence and witness accounts, helped authorities piece together a more complete narrative. Michael Parks, who was already serving time at the Okaloosa Correctional Institution in Crestview, Florida, for an unrelated offense, became the prime suspect. On the 27th of October, 2022, he was officially charged with the murders of Lisa Collins and Stephen Rios. His charges were extensive: 2 counts of second-degree murder with a firearm, 2 counts of third-degree felony, and 1 count of armed robbery causing death. Authorities believe that Michael Parks' motive was robbery, perhaps related to drugs, but the full reasons behind his cruelty remain largely unanswered. Even now, the why still echoes through the grief of the families who wonder what truly happened that night, behind the closed door of the East River Drive home. In October 2023, after a tense trial where Amy testified against her husband, Michael Parks was sentenced to 3 life sentences. No chance of parole, no more silence. For the families, the verdict brought a measure of closure, but not peace. How could it? Closure doesn't erase the years lost, the birthdays missed, the dreams cut short. But it does mean something. It means their fight wasn't in vain, that Lisa and Stephen weren't forgotten. The house on East River Drive still stands. To the neighbors, it may just be another home on another street. But to two families, and to the team of investigators who refuse to give up, it is a symbol of both horror and hope. A reminder that time can delay justice, but it cannot erase it. Lisa Collins was 21. She had a life waiting just beyond the corner. Stephen Rios was 35, with a future still in motion. They were loved. They mattered. And now, even after years of silence, their story ends with the truth.